When was the last time you had a conversation with a stranger? Her name was Magdalena. She was 86 years old, and I saw her every day at the coffee shop that I would go to in Spain. She had sparkly blue eyes and a lovely smile that lit up the room, but I'd never spoken to her before, and I always wondered about her life, and I wondered what amazing stories she might have to tell. So one day, I was sitting and having my coffee, and she approached me, and she asked me, "Can you help me with this packet of sugar? I'm having trouble with it." I said, "Yes, of course, I'm delighted for the opportunity." I said, "Would you like to sit with me? I'm alone, and I'd love the company." She said, "Yes, I would." And from that moment, we embarked on a journey together, sharing stories, histories, dreams. I learned of her strong Castilian roots, and she learned of my dreams to travel the world and make a difference in some way. So this one interaction with a stranger led to me visiting her nursing home, and the day that I left Spain, we both cried out of this emotion of this connection that we built together. So if we had made that opportunity to chat, to connect, to discuss in that moment, I would have lost the opportunity to see the world from a different perspective, to understand somebody's story in a different way. So in a world where we're constantly so busy and preoccupied with work and financial pressures, we're finding it more and more difficult to connect and engage in a physical space. On social media, however, we're constantly engaged and we're constantly connecting, aren't we, with thousands of friends from all over the world. But what happens when you shut down that laptop screen or you turn off your phone and you're suddenly alone in your room? And although you've been making connections, are these connections meaningful? Have you been left with this sense of wow, sense of awe, sense of this person has changed my life? No, we're not left with that. So studies show that social media is on the rise, which is wonderful in a lot of ways. But there's also something happening in our society that's really worrying and deeply rooted. And it's the fact that issues surrounding anxiety and depression are higher than ever. 8.2 million cases of anxiety are reported in the UK this year. In 2012, the rates of depression doubled. So why is this happening if we're so connected, if we're so involved, if we're sharing so much? Is there something that we're missing here? So research done, looking at individualist versus collectivist societies, has actually shown that individualist societies suffer more from anxiety, from depression. And it's just wondering, putting it out there, is this something to do with the fact that maybe in our societies like the UK, we're more focused on individual goals, achieving our individual dreams, which is wonderful in a lot of ways, but it can sometimes be quite lonely, right? So with collectivist societies, what we're seeing is an approach that social communities build together. There's an impact, there's a drive to work together to belong in that social community. So as a linguist, as a communicator, I'm really impressed with the work of Etienne Wenger. And Etienne Wenger talks about community of practice theory. And it might seem something, what is this theory? Is it something, how can I relate to this? We all belong to a community of practice. Community of practice is about sharing goals, sharing a common objective, and belonging to something because we meet and we engage face to face, or it can be online as well, but we talk about face to face on a regular basis. And this can be your families, this can be sports teams, this can be groups of friends, but you're sharing something, you're connecting, you're engaged in this together. So one part of Etienne Wenger's theory that I'm fascinated by is the fact that he says that belonging to a community of practice is an integral part of our survival as human beings. And actually, if you think about that, okay, we can all go off and we need time by ourselves, but belonging and feeling that we belong somewhere is really important, right? So, as a linguist and as somebody that's always been fascinated by communication, I was really interested in finding out how do we achieve this belonging. And one way of doing this for me was actually by looking at the language we use. How do we communicate to belong, okay? I was so intrigued by this that I decided to spend 3 years of my life working on a PhD that examined it. And I looked at two groups of students, novice professionals as they're called, because it was working on professional projects. And I looked at a group of engineers and I looked at a group of marketing students. Now, just before, because I saw that we have a mix of both STEM and liberal arts in the audience, this could also be switched the other way around. It's just the groups, okay? It's not necessarily that one focuses more on another way of speaking. But what I found in my study was that although both groups were very productive and at the end they both achieved very high standard of work, the teams themselves had a very different way of engaging with each other. And the marketing group spent time building bonds, engaging humour and interaction, and making the space to learn about each other's weekends and personal lives through relational topics. So we had the higher one in the red here in the graph. And the engineers, they did it sometimes, but it wasn't the core focus of what they were doing. They were more focused on getting a task done. And although we see a large blue line of humour there, it was more individual humour. It was more kind of a one-liner and everyone would laugh and it would continue. Whereas the red that we're seeing in the marketing, it was collaborative. Everybody was doing this together. One person would say something funny and someone else would jump in and jump in and jump in. So it was very much kind of a team effort, which was interesting to me. And just looking at some data here, 2 examples. So one sentence, I think you need to go down to the maths library and start reading the management reports. Versus, basically, I mean, obviously, we don't have to go through it, but, da-da-da. So what do you think the difference with those 2 sentences is? Just immediately looking at it for that face value. Of course, it depends on the tone, okay? Even though the first sentence, I think you, that could be said, I think you, but what if it said, I think you need to do this? How do you then feel? Okay, I'm not really part of this. I'm not having any say in this decision. Whereas the second one, why don't we, or obviously we don't have to, putting forward your idea, but actually making it part of a group decision in order to make everybody feel part of the collaborative process, right? So we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But what I was fascinated by was the fact that people had such different ways of engaging, connecting, and communicating. And one thing this is coming through in workplace discourse more and more and more is the fact that a happy workplace is a more productive workplace, okay? And studies have been done and research has been done into humour and seeing how when we engage in humour, we lighten the burdens, we feel more energetic, we're actually connecting. When you're walking down the corridor in your workplace and you're saying, hey, how's it going, to your colleagues, you immediately open up something bright, something that sparks in both of you. So it's important. Surveys have been done on this, and with Google in particular, they focused on employee satisfaction and making people feel more connected and engaged in their work. And satisfaction and productivity rose by 37%. So the statistics are there. This is something we need to be working on. So how can we become more engaged? What is it that we can do in our everyday lives, in our workplaces and beyond? So obviously we've talked about the impacts of humour. But one thing that I think we sometimes lack is showing interest. Actually showing somebody that you care. Not just asking, oh, hi, how are you? And keep walking, okay, it's just a way of saying hello, right? But actually asking, how's your day going? And listening when somebody says, actually, it's really terrible. And sometimes that's okay. It's not always about positive, happy, humorous, positive interactions. Sometimes it's actually about saying, I'm really sorry. Tell me about it. And that is the human essence of engaging. And that makes for meaningful interaction and makes for something more than we can ever get by liking a photograph or sharing something, online. We're actually sharing in that moment and making this connection valuable and impacting on each other's lives. How many times after a conversation has somebody said, oh, thank you for letting me share that. That was actually really important. So being open and listening, these are really important factors for good communication. And of course, this tiny pronoun, we. Rather than you do this, I want to do that. Of course, there are times we're going to have to use those. We're not saying eradicate them completely. But just using the simple 2 little letter word, we, makes it more collaborative, makes it feel like a community effort, makes us feel like we belong to the decision-making processes of that conversation. So now that we've talked about the positives, we also need to think about the barriers to effective communication. And obviously these can range from stereotypes that are quite negative, when we see somebody, how they dress, how they act, are we just going to judge them immediately and not, try and engage because of that or be open. But it's also down to power structures in the workplace. If somebody is seen as an incredibly senior, official, formal member of staff, we going to feel that we can't communicate with them, or vice versa? They feel like they don't want to communicate with you because it's a different level. We need to try and break these things down, okay? We need to try and relate to each other on a more engaging level. Also, the fear of the unknown. For me, it might be very easy to speak to strangers and go out there and make conversation. But I know for a lot of people, and maybe for a lot of you, this is not that easy. But it doesn't have to be a groundbreaking, life-changing conversation straight away. It can lead to that. And being open can put you out there. So one thing I do want to talk about in a little more detail are the assumptions that we have of each other. And a barrier to our communication are our language choices, okay? So our language use in specific contexts. And I want to tell you just a little story from my own background. So I grew up in Ireland, half Chilean, half Irish. And I love Ireland. It's a wonderful country and an amazing childhood there. So I really identified with the culture. And because I don't stereotypically look Irish, maybe, I used to get the question a lot, where are you from? Especially in my younger adult years. So this was something that I thought, okay, Ardbert, local village, fantastic. And that was usually fine, that would satisfy. But sometimes you would have the person that would say, no, where are you really from? Okay? And this used to kind of like, okay, I'll be polite here. I'll say, well, I'm from, Tumbridge. It's a little bit outside of countryside Ireland. And then, if people really wanted to go a step further, no, but where are your parents from? And then for me, that delved into me of thinking, oh, I have to explain this now, and my mum's from Chile, and my dad's from Ireland. And does everybody else have to give that personal information in the first 2 sentences of meeting somebody? Probably not. But what's interesting with this is, a lot of the time, this would cause me not to want to talk to that person anymore, even though it didn't happen very often. But it did shut things down. And it made me feel like, okay, can't we have a conversation about what's happening right now in this moment that we're connected in together, rather than picking on something that you believe is an important assumption to make. And I think that it obviously depends on the context. For example, when I go to New York and I am asked, oh, where are you from, by somebody, that has a Latin roots, I'm delighted because I think, oh, I connect with that. When people hear that my name is Tania, Russians say, Tatiana, that's a Russian name, fantastic. And Italians or Spanish might think they connect with how I look, and that's something that can be very exciting. You can feel very international, okay? But when you're in your home culture, and this question is asked of you, no, but where are you really from? That sometimes can make you feel like you don't belong, right? So we have to be careful of our words, we have to be careful of our questions, and realize the impact that these things can have on our whole dynamic and the whole conversation from that point. So this brings me to the next point. Where can we connect then? How can we find these engaging, these meaningful interactions in our everyday lives? Actually, that's up to you, because they're everywhere around you, okay? It can be in the queue for your shopping, it can be sitting on a train, it can be on a plane. Traveling always does often offer up a lot of different ways of engaging. And I do have to say that, talking about belonging and community, one thing that sometimes not feeling like I fully belonged or fully identified at home was that I felt like I could belong everywhere else, or I kind of had to in some ways. And I lived in Beijing for a while, and something that I found, it's an amazing city, bustling, 30 million people, okay? It's absolutely intense, it's crazy. I didn't have the language, so for someone who communicates with people so much and thrives for that was very difficult for me, okay? So what happened was I started having to do photocopies for my work, and once a week I would go. And what do you see in this picture? It's a random, tiny little room, right? Stuffed with boxes and photocopies. And I went in for the first day, and in my terrible Chinese, I would ask, I need like 3 of this, and you're engaging and you're opening up so much because you have to really express what you're trying to say in that moment. And what happened was incredible, because this lady and I didn't have any common language whatsoever. We didn't understand each other's cultures. We were connecting in some strange way, but I would walk into this photocopying shop once a week and she would see me, and we would grab each other's arms and jump up and down with excitement and hi! She would say ni hao, I would say hi. And it was just this amazing moment. And again, this is my last day in Beijing. And just you see that connection. And that's no longer a stranger. Although we didn't have a common language, although we didn't have a common culture, we engaged, we connected. This was magical. So I encourage you to think about this and to think about making your own communication meaningful across cultures, across boundaries. Make that communication something that can change your life, change your perspective, learn somebody else's story, tell them your story, be open. And obviously, think about these different things when you're doing it. Be genuine. I think this is so important because when you're genuine with somebody, they really feel that. They really feel that you care about the answer they're going to give. They really feel that you're going to listen to their story. And I think that the value and the wealth of knowledge, of friendship that we can get from this is so incredibly huge. And we share and we connect on such a different level that technology can never allow us to do. So I challenge you to go out into the world tomorrow and next week. And when you're in that supermarket, ask the cashier, how's your day going? And see them light up that somebody has taken the time to make their mundane day a little bit more interesting. Look at the person sitting beside you on the train and say, how's your journey going? Where is your last destination? And see how they think, wow, someone wants to talk to me. This is great. Sit beside somebody different to the lecturer. Acknowledge somebody at work who you've never seen before. All of these different things. So when we engage and when we connect, we belong. But we also exist in that moment. And we share that moment together. And it's something mutual that we both get. So I'll finish on this final question. When was the last time you had a conversation with a stranger?